I'm like.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Time is 6:30. We have a quorum present, and I would like to ask if we can start with our call to order and roll call.
Sure. We'll note that Commissioner Alvarez is absent tonight. Co-Chair Baker?
Here.
Commissioner Kaplan?
Here.
Commissioner Cole is absent tonight. Commissioner Keirala will be here shortly. Co-Chair Pickett?
Here.
Commissioner Tamimi?
Here.
Ex officio Snow?
Here.
And I think that accounts for everybody.
Thank you, Carrie. We do have a quorum. Welcome to everyone. Happy Lunar New Year to us all, and we're also in the month of Ramadan as well. And of course, also observing Black History Month in February and celebrating Black futures as well. Just wanted to welcome everyone here. The next item is approval of the agenda. And if we are prepared to move the agenda, I would entertain a motion to that effect.
I'll motion.
Okay, motion to approve the
I
agenda.
can second that.
Second by Ellie. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And we will then go to brief announcements for staff, by staff, commissioners, and liaisons. Do any commissioners have announcements they'd like to share? I just wanted to note that I had an opportunity, speaking of Black History Month, to attend a really wonderful event at the beginning of the month that was, I believe, co-sponsored by the city. Some of you may have been there as well, called the Sankofa Experience, organized by Davis's own Sandy Coleman, who is, if you don't know her, truly a force of nature. And I just wanted to thank everyone at the city and others who were involved in what was really an inspirational, entertaining event. So thank you to the city for helping to put that on at Theater on February 1st. Please.
I'll just give a brief update from the school district. A reminder that also recently was celebrated or honored Japanese Day Remembrance. Thursday the 19th was the annual remembrance of the signing of Executive Order 9066, which was the incarceration of Japanese people and Japanese citizens, U.S. citizens during World War II. And that our race and social justice class, U.S. history class, which is one of the 11th grade history options, hosted a survivor of the internment camps, the incarceration camps, in a forum yesterday. And she spoke about her experience and about her perspectives to, I don't even know how many students, but maybe a couple hundred students. I wanted to point that out.
Thanks for sharing that. Okay, other announcements? Let's ask our council staff, committee staff, and council liaisons.
I don't have any announcements. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That will then conclude item number 3, and we will turn next to public comment. This is general public comment for matters that are not listed on the agenda. We also do allow folks to make general public, to use this general public comment time to make comment on items that are on the agenda if you can't stay for that item. That is also something that we can do. We normally allow 3 minutes for public comment since we don't have that many folks tonight. I think that seems like we can stick to that convention. But let me then begin just by opening it up for general public comment. Good evening.
Hi,
Welcome.
good evening. Hi. So Human Relations Commission, City Council members, and I don't know, City Attorney, I don't know if they're here. So I'm Natalia Dipsosa, I'm a professor at UC Davis. I'm here also with women from Cafecito. Thank you for sharing the draft of the sanctuary ordinance. I believe that as written, the ordinance is not proactively and consistently providing safety and reassurances to immigrant communities. We must be notified promptly when the city knows or believes that immigration authorities are or will be present for the purpose of immigration enforcement. UC Davis and DJUSD are required by the state to notify their communities. That can be faculty, staff, students, and for Davis Unified School District parents when immigration authorities are on their campuses, and the city should be following that model. As community members, we must have access upon request to all documentation related to immigration enforcement actions, surveillance, investigations, detention, arrests, workplace raids, deportation, removals, or any other immigration enforcement activities. All law enforcement officers must be clearly identifiable when they are in the city. Furthermore, all activities and use of force by immigration authorities must be recorded and reported. The city, in my opinion, has the obligation to protect the community against fear. If the city is going to be immigrant serving, well-intentioned, and be in solidarity with immigrants, notification and reporting will allow us as a community to develop a comprehensive ICE MIGRA preparedness and response plan that includes legal defense, and hopefully it will be fully funded by the city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Good evening.
Good evening, I'm Jimena Diaz-Jackson, and I'm reading the comment of one of the señoras from Cafecito. I think it would be good to have a local alarm system in Davis where you can register. It would be an alert. The city of Davis would let the community know about things, issues that are going on, not only about immigration, but any other issue. Like something like when the school district sent alerts to the parents when something is going on in the schools. I want to let you know that we are concerned about our families, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, council members, commissioners. Yeah, my name is Ning Wan. I've been here a few times to your meeting. I did serve as the commissioner for the Davis Historical Resources Management commission for like 5 years. But the dismissed the commission, I don't know why. But anyway, I'm turned out. I'm here, I have a few questions. The first one is for the sanction city. So which means, city has against the federal law. Will that cause, any conflicts between governments? And I also has another concern is I'm reading a book called IBM and the Holocaust. And it talk about, during the World War II and the war sanction city as well. My concern is, I encountered the Chinese Communist Party spies that are not even human. The from Fenbols to call themselves CIA. It's because it starts with Confucius Institute agent to call themselves CIA. But the American government has been already, has many laws ban or restrict the Confucius Institute in the United States. That's good news, but I'm afraid, the city or the university cannot tell the difference between robots and real immigrants, human. That will cause some problem. And what encountered to me is I want to share this with the city police. I was arrested at campus when I just walked into Morocco of UC Davis, and they put me handicraft, then they say, they charged me for failure to leave or return within 7 days to school property. That's the charge to me. But I've been going to court for many times. I kind of feel, I don't know if Davis police are aware of that. I believe there are Chinese Communist Party, spies patrolling the controls Chinese dissidents like me, that follows me around, stalking on me, and that's what happened to me. So I believe the human relation, I would like to see from the IBM and the Holocaust, I kind of want to find out, the human relation is extended to the AI and the real human, like a real woman, a real mother like me, So that's my concern, and thank you.
Thank you for coming. Good evening. Welcome. This is General Public.
Good evening, Human Relations Commission. My name is Spear. I have talked here before. I'm a resident of Davis for the past 7.5 years. And I am also here in agreement with Professor Yves Sosa that the ordinance as it is drafted currently does not do enough for the community or communities of people in town that are in need of a stronger ordinance. More specifically, there are multiple thoughts that we brainstormed and recommended as a coalition of organizations that care about this ordinance and care about the status of our immigrant communities in our town. And some of the things that we missed include on the current ordinance draft include a banning of sharing data that gets past immigration authorities, such as facial recognition software. That includes the removal of any public cameras that use the quote-unquote flock system, as that has been accessed by immigration authorities previously in an illegal capacity. A listing of know your rights information online. The creation of city emergency powers during immigration enforcement actions, like the ability to create or apply an eviction moratorium. Allowing non-traditional proofs of income for agricultural workers or seasonal workers who don't have the capacity to exhibit a W-2 or the such. Removing application fees on low-income housing applications for those such individuals who may need temporary housing in that capacity. Restricting the Davis Police Department from detaining or stopping individuals based on race, as well as banning the Davis Police Department from hiring previous ICE or DHS or CBP agents. And then the last point I want to specifically make is the possibility of creating a statutory maximum time of storage for sensitive data, like immigration status, when individuals do go through processing and the bureaucratic functionality of our city. While I do think this ordinance can be an okay start, given its strength to disallow a lot of immigration enforcement actions in association with the city, I believe it's not enough as a member, as a concerned member of this town. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Miller, good evening.
I'm Alan Miller. I was talking at the end and I was saying, please don't put the city through the MAPA report and have people fighting all that. And I was saying a bunch of crap, and then I look up and I see Kevin going. So I thought, okay, I'll go home and I'll see on the thing with a camera, here's me talking, and then I said something, and then Kevin started silently laughing out loud. So then I could figure out what he was laughing at, because I don't think any of it was funny. But it must have been ironically funny. But I went home and then I look and it says, due to technical difficulties, the last 5 minutes of the meeting were not recorded. So, luckily I recorded it with my iPhone, so now I have to have my second iPhone here so I can, watch all of you. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so there's MAPA, so there's this MAPA pyramid I described. So if we had the opposite, God, I wish it wasn't the opposite, it would be baseless claims against Jews with anti-Semitism, no, against Mappas with anti-Mappa or Mappaphobia on top of that, and then recommendations to eradicate Mappaphobia or anti-Mappaism or whatever. Don't worry, whatever I'm saying, it's actually not supposed to make sense. I'm just like saying Mappa until Mappa brings us to our meeting where we have the forces of the two sides and their flags fighting each other, because that's apparently all this city knows how to do. So I was really disturbed. I was on campus and there was a rally for ICE, and it was really good to see people rallying for something besides kill the Jews. And then I was listening, and it was like, you know, ICE, ICE baby, or whatever, that, you know, ICE go home, and, you know, there were like 10 chants about ICE, and then I hear, globalize the Intifada, and there's like, you know, 20 times the people that were there for that, but everybody, you know, there's probably 1,000 people, globalize the Intifada. So, you know, that's called repetition and chanting, and that's how you brainwash people. Maybe they'll learn that. They're being brainwashed.
All right. Is there anyone else then for general public comment? Okay, seeing none, that will conclude our item number 4, and we will move then to the consent items. There are 2 this evening. One is approval of the minutes. The other is approval of our process for awarding the Plum High Wind Award. That issue is discussed in a report that is part of the agenda packet. But I would, if there's no one wanting to take anything off the consent calendar, then propose that we have a motion on the approval of the consent calendar.
I motion that we approve the consent calendar with both items on it. Looks fine to me.
I will second it.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And the motion carries unanimously. Okay, thank you very much for that. The consent calendar is approved. We are now on to item 6, our regular items. Excuse me, and we are going to begin with the Sanctuary City Ordinance Review and Recommendations. So if I may just kind of open the item briefly and talk about, just maybe describe for context where we are and how we got here. So we're all clear about what we're doing tonight. So last September, the City Council authorized the HRC to work on reaffirming and enhancing the city's sanctuary city status. A committee of the commission then researched and drafted a proposed ordinance that we intended to discuss at our last meeting, but that item was not on the agenda because of some staff concerns, and we did hear a lot of support, of course, from the community on the idea of adopting an ordinance, and most importantly, I think, so did the City Council when we went back on February 3rd, asking the council to clarify whether we could move forward. City Council then directed city staff to draft a proposed sanctuary ordinance for review and comment by the HRC, and for the HRC to concurrently recommend to the City Council principles that elements that might be reflected in such an ordinance. So that is where we are right now after the City Council heard, I think, from the community, including many of you here tonight. So what we have is a draft ordinance proposed by the city staff, and we have a second document prepared by an HRC committee that has not yet been discussed or reviewed by the full commission, but that sets forth some proposed principles for what we think a city ordinance should look like based on research that we did regarding state law and actions that have been taken by other local governments. And of course, importantly, taking into consideration the testimony and public comments made to the HRC and to the City Council. I also just want to note that many thanks to the city staff, we have Spanish language versions of those documents. And I particularly want to call out Carrie Dyer for your help, Carrie, in making those translations possible, and to the, I believe, interns on the staff who were involved in that. So we do have those documents for anyone who would like them tonight. I think they're in the back of the room. So what we will do now then is briefly just set out the commission's proposed principles for the ordinance and take public comment on whether the committee's proposed principles reflect the city's values, have discussion among the commission, and hopefully take a vote on that. We will also have a staff presentation on the staff's proposed ordinance, and we will take a public comment on that document and have a discussion among commission members that we hope will be helpful for providing feedback for the city council's consideration. And of course, we are privileged tonight to have both of our council liaisons present, Mayor Neville and Vice Mayor Martina with us tonight. So we're grateful for that. So, I know I've been talking a lot, but before we start the discussion, let me just note, partially in response to the public commenter, without speaking for the full commission, I think I can say pretty confidently that we do not intend the sanctuary ordinance to necessarily be the city's only policy response on the issue of support and protection of immigrants in our community. In our proposed principles, what we tried to do was to address the scope of issues that have been proposed in similar local government ordinances, but we have heard many good ideas that are outside the scope of the traditional sanctuary ordinances that we are familiar with, but we believe deserve to be fully considered. After we conclude this item, we're going to hear a report, which is 6B, from our other committee that has been looking into those issues, and we are looking forward to having further items on our agendas to take actions on the good additional steps the city might take to address what is, I think, an extraordinary period of federal government actions. So, with all of that, turning now then to the Commission's proposed principles and the staff's proposed ordinance, I just want to start by saying I'm pleased to see a lot of common ground. I think our process tonight will probably be more efficient if we focus on where there might be differences between the proposed principles and the staff's proposed ordinance. But I do want to note that at the outset that there is a lot of agreement between the two documents, and if we're talking about differences, I don't want to overlook the fact that I think there is a lot of common ground here. So, of course, given that the process that brought us here, the staff did not have the advantage of reviewing the Commission's proposed principles before it put forward the proposed ordinance. So there might even be more alignment there than we now know. So what are the proposed principles that the Commission is wanting to recommend to the City Council? As I mentioned, the committee has developed 10 proposed principles that are set out in the committee's report. It's included in the agenda packet, and I believe can be put up on the screen for whoever is operating the audiovisual. But what I want to do is just take a moment to list them so that everyone is clear on what we will be discussing, and then we will have the staff presentation on the proposed ordinance, and of course hearing public comment on both of those. So without further ado, then by way of really brief introduction, I just wanted to highlight what the proposed principles are, keeping in mind that this is just a document prepared by the committee and has not yet been the subject of action by the full commission. The first one is simply that there will be no city agency or resources used to assist, cooperate with, participate in, facilitate, or support immigration enforcement.
Kevin,
Yes.
I think Carrie has a.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to see if you wanted the principal's document pulled up. I have this one pulled up for the order of the agenda, which had this one as first.
If we could just.
So you're
and then we'll-
switching items 1 and 2?
Well, oh, I see. Yes, we just want to go through the HRC committee's proposed principles, and then we will turn to the staff ordinance so we have some sense of where there may be any daylight, and if there is any daylight, whether we can
Okay, just give me
explore
one
that a
second,
little
please.
bit.
I just need 1 second, I'm sorry. Okay, there you are.
Thank you very much, Karen. Sorry for the confusion. Okay, so I've read the first item, but it's now up on the screen too. There are, I think, some minor revisions that we might consider as we discuss that a little bit further tonight. But let me then turn it over to other members of the committee to walk through the other principles that are listed, so you don't have to hear my voice anymore.
Yeah, so if you have the document up in front of you, we're just gonna go over the bolded statements on top, not read out this entire thing, but it gives you a sense of the kind of like big bucket principles that we're working with here. So Kevin covered the first one. The second one is a non-discrimination policy based on immigration or citizenship status. This should be part of the city's civil rights ordinance that this commission did work on last year and is currently being reviewed and hopefully will also be put before city council. But as that kind of works its way through the bureaucracy, we thought it was important to have this non-discrimination clause listed in this ordinance, in the sanctuary city ordinance, and find that it'll be particularly important as we move past the ordinance towards things like housing that has been brought up a lot. So you can kind of note the last bullet point says this prohibition applies to landlords, hospitals, and other business establishments.
Number 3 basically just says that the city would be as conservative as possible in collecting and storing any sort of identifying information about people. Obviously, we need to follow the law. Obviously, we need to follow any court decisions, any judicial warrants. If we have people sign their permission for certain information to be collected and stored, that would be fine. But just be really conscientious about limiting how much information that identifies a person's immigration status, citizenship, and even address, all that kind of stuff. Limiting that to the extent that it is legal and possible.
Right. Number 4 then is a proposed restriction on city use of public funds to pay businesses or other entities that share citizenship or immigration status information or information regarding an individual's location or movements with immigration authority or with other state or federal agencies that would share that information in turn with an immigration authority.
All right, number 5 is about not disclosing personal information that the city might need, right, like people's names and addresses. So that information is going to get collected by the city, but it should not be shared except where required by like a judicial warrant. So again, it's building off of number 3 and just trying to limit the amount of information that is being shared.
Number 6, city employees and agents should be prohibited from additional employment or volunteer work with immigration authorities. We see that as a conflict of interest, as many other cities have. We've heard from several people that having had previous work with those agencies might also be something that we should choose to forbid for city employees.
Okay. Number 7, community notification. We heard this raised in public comment a moment ago. It is also addressed in the staff report that accompanies the staff's draft ordinance. So I know we're going to have further discussion about that, but the proposal that's being suggested by the committee for the commission's consideration is that the community do be notified if the city is informed or believes that immigration authorities are present in the city, comparable to the notification that's given to the educational institutions.
All right, number 8 says that all law enforcement officers need to be easily identifiable. So officers cannot purposefully conceal their identity while on the job.
Number 9 says use of force by immigration authorities should be recorded and reported. This is directed towards the police department within, obviously, the law, keeping track of any abuses by immigration authorities, and of course providing medical treatment to anybody who might be injured in such an altercation.
And then finally, number 10 is a proposal that requests from immigration authorities be reported. This is another area that is addressed in the memo accompanying the staff draft ordinance, and I think we'll have some further discussion about that. But it's set forth in some more detail there in the proposed principles. Okay, so with that introduction, I think we probably now want to hear the city's staff report, keeping in mind, of course, that, as I mentioned earlier, the city staff did not have the benefit of seeing the principles that we've just reviewed, because that's a new document. But in order to try to keep these things on track, they're kind of running in parallel. And I know that we have the police chief, Chief Henry, here with us tonight. Welcome. And also the city's attorney, Inder, also welcome to you. And if you would just take it away, we will have your presentation, maybe some clarifying questions from the commission, but then go right to public comment.
Good evening. It's nice to be here this evening. I'm Inder Khalsa. I'm the city attorney. So I am here with our Chief of Police, Todd Henry, to discuss the draft ordinance that is before you tonight. Thank you for acknowledging that we were working on this ordinance and had finalized it at the time that we first saw the principles, so we would be happy to speak to the principles or go through those verbally, but we did not have them in front of us when we were drafting the ordinance. What we did have in front of us was a draft ordinance provided by this subcommittee. And so what we were responding to was the language in that ordinance. Some of the items in the principles list were not, just to be clear, were not in that draft ordinance, so we were not intentionally omitting them when they're not included. We simply didn't have them in front of us. So with that, I do have a brief presentation, and then we're happy to answer any questions. So first of all, we just wanted to start off by stating once again that Davis is a sanctuary city and has been a sanctuary city since 1986. It adopted its first sanctuary city resolution in 1986, and this issue has come up a lot in public comment, so I just want to clarify that a city resolution is an expression of city intent. It is also binding on staff. A resolution is city council directing staff as to its activities. So with respect to an ordinance carries the force of law. It is binding on third parties. It is binding on the public. You know, we can, for example, tell folks that, you know, allowing a loud party violates the municipal code and issue citations. So an ordinance is enforceable against the public, but just to be clear, a resolution is binding on staff. That is city council, our governing body, telling us as staff how they would like us to behave. So until, we have reaffirmed our sanctuary city resolution several times. To my mind, we are a sanctuary city, and that resolution is binding on us as staff, who are the relevant folks who would carry out the intent of the resolution. But the city council has directed us to come back with an ordinance. Just to be clear, the ordinance is still primarily addressed at the activities of the city government. So we'll go over that in more detail shortly. California is a sanctuary state, and when SB 54 was adopted, I believe it was in 2017, I call it the California Values Act. That actually prohibits the use of local resources and local law enforcement to further federal immigration enforcement. The California Values Act was upheld by the Ninth Circuit, and when they applied to see if the United States Supreme Court would like to pick it up and review it, they declined to review it. And what that means for the non-lawyers in the room is that SB 54 has been upheld by the highest courts in the United States, and it is good law. It was upheld against a preemption challenge. So one of our basic premises that we worked from in drafting this ordinance was that we felt that SB 54 was a very safe starting point from which to consider what additional measures the city might like to take. The Davis Police Department, of course, is compliant with state law and complies with SB 54 in its interactions with the community, and we have adopted locally police department policies that are consistent with and further SB 54. Sorry, this text is a little bit smaller than I realized it would be when I was writing it on my smaller screen at home. Just at a high level, and I don't want to pull everyone into a legal conversation, but just so that you can understand a little bit where Chief Henry and I are coming from here. Our primary concern in adopting an ordinance for the city of Davis is that it would be preempted by federal law. And when we say preempted, basically what this means is that in the United States, immigration law is solely a federal matter. It is enforced solely at the federal level, and federal law controls immigration enforcement. Local governments do not engage in immigration enforcement. That said, we also have no obligation to assist with federal law enforcement, and there is a long line of cases that says that the federal government cannot use local government to enforce federal law or to enforce federal crimes. So SB 54, generally the state law, I think it did a really clever job of walking the line of preemption. When SB 54 was adopted and when it was challenged under preemption, and it did withstand that challenge, there was a question at that time about whether or not SB 54 would be upheld. It was. I think part of the reason for that is that SB 54 walked the line very carefully. There's a body of case law that says that local law enforcement cannot be used to enforce federal law. There's another body of case law that says local government cannot interfere with or obstruct the enforcement of federal law. We don't have to help, but we cannot get in the way. And what SB 54 did was carefully walk that line. So we are attempting to expand upon SB 54 a bit to increase the protections that the city of Davis is providing to our whole community. But we are trying to do so in a way that does not push it so far that we are truly standing in the way of federal law enforcement, as there is a long line of cases that say that that type of regulation would be preempted by federal law, be found void, the city could be liable for damages, et cetera, et cetera. So early in February, we received council direction to go ahead and draft an ordinance. I'm putting the specific council direction up here because these were our guiding principles as we put together the ordinance. Council directed us to incorporate and expand upon state law with respect to cooperation. In this case, it's more like with respect to non-cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. But they also asked that we develop an ordinance that does not conflict with state or federal law and importantly, does not put any city employee or city official in any physical danger or in a position of potentially violating state or federal law. So we would not want anyone working for the city of Davis to be put in harm's way as they attempt to enforce an ordinance like this, which I think gets us to another critical point that you may hear from Chief Henry, which is that there is a big question about the, I guess, from a policy perspective and from a number of different angles, we certainly don't want to put our Davis police officers in harm's way by asking them to physically impede federal law enforcement. And we have an obligation as employers to our employees of the city not to, essentially put them in harm's way. So we also need to be mindful of our obligations towards our city employees. So the final part of council direction was that we would then bring this ordinance back to HRC for input before bringing it back to city council. Since you were simultaneously working on your principles, we will be listening to your feedback tonight, taking notes, and then bringing to city council potentially an updated ordinance with updated recommendations. I think I have covered all of these, but these were the main considerations that we were looking at when we drafted this ordinance. One of the ones that I didn't mention, but which is in the staff report, is that the city receives substantial federal funding. That federal funding is used for critical social services as well as infrastructure. And one of our considerations as city staff is that we would not want an ordinance to conflict with any contractual language that is currently in our grants from the federal government. There's a little bit more background in the staff report, but some of the funds that we receive does go to critical affordable housing services, homeless services, and other social services that the city provides that we frankly have no alternative funding sources for. So just keep that in mind. And of course, you'll be hearing from Chief Henry that in some of these, with respect to some of these provisions, there may be primarily legal concerns. You'll hear from me about those. With respect to other provisions or provisions that we opted not to include in our ordinance, our concerns are primarily practical. So with that, the ordinance in front of you incorporates the HRC subcommittee ordinance language, especially with respect to non-cooperation with federal law enforcement. It prohibits the use of city resources, staff, to cooperate with or assist in really in any way, and there's a long list of different types of ways, cooperating in any way with federal immigration enforcement, with the exception of some very narrow circumstances as prescribed by SB 54 or where a judicial warrant is presented. So in a lot of ways, I think in terms of the non-cooperation language, we incorporated to a great extent, pretty much verbatim, the HRC subcommittee's recommendations. We carved out a few small exceptions based on input from staff. For example, SB 54 would allow our local police to share immigration status information with federal authorities. And keep in mind, we work with federal law enforcement beyond immigration enforcement. For example, the FBI would allow them to share in certain circumstances where there's a serious felony conviction. And we did want to ensure that DPD has the ability to prosecute and serious felonies, and that we're not limited with respect to those. But in every other instance, we are already prevented from sharing data, sharing information, cooperating, facilitating, et cetera, federal law enforcement. And then we also incorporated a provision proposed by the subcommittee that would prohibit use of city property for staging, processing, or establishing an operational base for immigration enforcement. There may be some nuances here. When we talk about city property in this instance, we would be largely referring to not to public sidewalks per se or rights of way where anyone is allowed to be, but rather we are talking about city hall, the courtyard, city-owned property, areas in which the city can control and exclude the public under reasonable circumstances. So the city has not to my knowledge, federal law enforcement has never asked to use city property for these purposes, nor has this yet been an issue for the city, but of course we have heard about it happening in other jurisdictions, so this would prohibit the use of city property for those purposes. A couple of the revisions that I made to the subcommittee's draft, I did describe in more detail the revisions that we made in the staff report and tried to be very transparent about the changes that we made, including major ones obviously, but also listing out some of the maybe less significant changes just for full transparency, since I know that the draft ordinance has not been widely circulated. So a couple of the changes that we made here were, we clarified the definition of immigration authorities. We wanted, again, to be clear, the law enforcement does cooperate with federal criminal law enforcement, for example, the FBI, and that we would not consider them to be immigration authorities, and that the ordinance is aimed solely at cooperation with immigration enforcement, the enforcement of immigration law, not the enforcement of other laws outside of that scope. We did remove the provision that would require that the community be notified by the mayor or the city manager of the presence of federal law enforcement, and we had some practical considerations that we described in the staff report, and we'd be happy to speak to some more. We also removed the annual staff reporting requirement, and I did note some of our reasoning for that. As background for these two, I just want to note that federal law enforcement has no obligation to notify the city that they are in the city of Davis. To the extent that we are using their notifications to arguably impede federal law enforcement by notifying potential subjects that they will be in the neighborhood, we would anticipate that federal law enforcement would simply stop providing any notification to the city. As it is today, we sometimes receive notification, but not always, is what I understand. So likewise, the annual reporting requirement required that staff report to council every interaction with federal law enforcement. On the one hand, that could be overly burdensome where there are pending investigations where local law enforcement has called in help from outside parties. And then on the other hand, we do not, as far as I know, we are not receiving regular contacts from federal law enforcement. The requirement that we report on every interaction that occurs over a year seemed onerous and would require a significant amount of staff and administrative burden. All right, and then finally, I just want to make a note, and this was in the principals list, that as most of you know, the state prohibition on immigration authorities utilizing masks was struck down in court since the city council meeting and before this meeting. So that said, Davis PD, our local law enforcement, do have a policy that prohibits the use of masks locally. So with that, I'd be happy to turn it over to Chief Henry to provide any additional comments, and then we'll take your questions.
Thank you very much.
Well, I should probably just say ditto. City attorney did a great job of kind of explaining the information that we took, the direction from council, the considerations that we made as we tried to work through drafting this ordinance. But happy to take specific questions, specifically if there's something around operational considerations and how this actually gets applied in a real life setting.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief, and City Attorney as well. Before we get to public comment, the custom is for kind of clarifying questions to be raised and prior to any discussion, and then we'll have public comment and then further discussion with the commission. So I think what we want to do just initially is ask whether there are any kind of general clarifying questions, and I'll note that I have a couple, that we want to kind of put to our city officials here with respect to the staff report.
I have a couple.
So two of the things that seem to be differing from the original ordinance or the ordinances drafted by the subcommittee are around notification and reporting. Those seem to be two things that have been essentially removed. The reasoning seems to be a bit of a mix though, so I'd love to get a little bit more clarity on that. Some of it seems to be around practicality, it would be difficult to do these things, and then others, I think especially with the notification, is that it would be potentially against federal government. I'm a little, so for the notification one, I think it's potentially, the concern there is more that it's against, it's basically impeding the federal government from doing their work. I'm curious how DJUSD and UCD is able to do that. Are they breaking the law? Why are they able to do it and the city is not? I also wonder if there's ways by working with organizations like NorCal Resist, Davis Media Access, that there's opportunities to work with them to get this message out through systems, if it's a systems issue, it's a practicality issue. Because people will be looking to you to provide them safety. And so if you can provide that, even if it's working through other channels to get that information, that could be very valuable. It doesn't have to come from the federal government because it's unlikely that they'll give you that. And I'm not sure how I feel about we'll stop hearing from the federal government if we start letting people know. I think that the way that we're seeing things now, I think we have to be protective and not assume that that is somehow going to now make the federal government not give us warning. So I would love to get a little more clarity on that. And then on the reporting, I would love to understand why this seems like such a difficult thing, because we recently just received an email this morning from Cecilia Aguirre Curry, and she noted that the California Attorney General, Rod Bonta, and Gavin Newsom have actually now opened up a website for people to do reporting on exactly what we're asking the police to do. And I would think it would be even more within the police remit to do this kind of reporting, like a sort of standard that you would report on aggression in our community. If our governor is expecting individuals in the community to do that themselves and creating a website for that, I would expect that our police department would be able to do the same. So those are the things I was a little bit wanting some clarity on, and understanding how much of it is practicality and how much of it is it concern about the federal government.
Sure. Good questions, and I'll try and answer some of the operational concerns. So reporting out regarding communication with DHS or ICE, the difficulty that we're facing right now is the administration has extended Title VIII authority to multiple agencies. So if we have communication with FBI, and let's say we're working on a human trafficking case, the question would be, is that a disclosable document? And how do we redact it? Is there the potential that that agency could share that information unbeknownst to us with DHS related to an immigration investigation? And so there's consistent interaction with federal agencies on a whole variety of things. Obviously, we don't engage in communication or enforcement or investigation related to immigration, but the difficulty is this Title VIII authority is no longer segregated to a specific department within the federal government. So the question is, all that communication, some of it could be very sensitive. We're potentially now asking everybody to take it, to redact it, to store it, then share it. And I guess at the end of the day, the real question is, how is that potentially beneficial? Because we're trying to determine, I think the intent of the clause is we want to know how often ICE is asking us for information, or how often are we interacting with ICE. And I can say that's not occurring at all, but we are having interaction with federal agencies on a regular basis. So if we reported out that, hey, we had this many interactions with federal agencies, it's going to appear that there's this huge volume of communication between the police department and immigration authorities, which just is not the case. So that's one of our concerns around that. And then if we share that data, it's going to require redaction as well. So if the FBI says, hey, we're working on a federal case related to human trafficking, and let's say the suspect in the case is undocumented, and we are providing information, obviously not related to immigration enforcement, related to violation of criminal law, that would fall into the category of potential disclosure. Yet, one, disclosure would be somewhat misleading to the community, and two, it would take staff time to process that and to redact all the information out of it that's related to an ongoing criminal investigation. So those are some of our concerns around that. As far as DHS communicating or reporting to the Davis Police Department, yes, they do. There are occasions where they will contact our comm center and they will say, this is DHS, we're conducting an operation on X street. No address, no information as to who it is, and when they're done, they say we're done, and they're off to whatever else they do. If there is a potential, the reason they do that is for deconfliction. So let's say that they were performing an operation and we didn't know they're there, and they're in unmarked cars and they're wearing whatever get up they decide is appropriate for that day, and our officers come into contact with them and they get out of a car holding a weapon, and now our officers are in a potential blue on blue or a situation where we have two armed law enforcement agencies who don't know they're supposed to be there together in potential conflict. So that's a common law enforcement practice, and if an agency that doesn't work in that jurisdiction comes into a jurisdiction, they notify the agency, hey, we're here, this is who we are, and we'll let you know when we're gone. So that's a safety precaution. Now, my assumption is, I have nothing to base this off, that they don't always do that. Sometimes they may be operating and we're completely unaware of it. My concern would be that if they became aware that, hey, we are going to disclose this information, they would just simply stop notifying us. And that's an easy thing to do. There's no statutory requirement to do that. They just do it out of best practice, but they're not required to do it. So we could be in a situation where they're in town and law enforcement has no idea. My concern is twofold, is that one, if an incident occurred at a residence, let's say it was a significant use of force incident between ICE, Customs, or whoever at a residence in the city of Davis, the only time we would be aware of what's going on or have understanding of that is when somebody called 911 and said, hey, there's a shootout at 1235 Main Street. The other issue is, as I mentioned, this deconfliction issue, is that we would not know they're there. And it's very possible officers could be driving down a street and come in contact with these ICE agents, which is concerning. So yes, that is a concern that we have related to us notifying the community that DHS or ICE or any of their subsidiaries are in the city working, is that they may just shut off that communication with us entirely. I'm not saying that that has to be the reason not to comply with this or to go down this road, but those are considerations that are a reality and that we take into account. The website, yes, I think that's a great thing. I think when people can push information out and make people aware, it's good. The problem is if ICE is in town, most often, I'm the last person to know, because there's a chain of communication that will occur throughout the community, and usually I will get a text message saying, are you aware of an ICE operation in the city? Most times, through different communication with different groups within our community, we determine it's just bad information, right? Or we're unaware of an ICE operation, and so we have no information to provide anyway. So, yes, we provided that information. If there wasn't a preemption issue, if there wasn't the potential for obstruction charges, the question is, how accurate is the information we're getting? Because we can't compel them to tell us. They do it because they feel it's the right thing to do, probably for their own safety. And so my only concern is potentially creating an environment where that no longer occurs, and that's not going to make the community safer. It potentially could make the community less safe, and it could also make our officers less safe too. So those are the concerns that we have around that. And I'll turn it over to the city attorney if she wants to add any other components to that.
And all I would add on the preemption issue is that, again, we have sort of, I think, two basic principles that we're clear about. One is that we don't have to cooperate with federal law enforcement as a local government agency, very clear on that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we know we cannot obstruct the enforcement of federal law. So a lot of communities are trying regulations that fall somewhere between those two. And until they're tried and tested in court, the fact that others have adopted them is, as we know from watching challenges all over the United States right now, not necessarily a guarantee that they would survive a preemption challenge. And so in being tasked with bringing an ordinance forward to City Council, I will of course be recommending that we take a course of action that I see brings less risk of a legal challenge that the city would have to defend at its own expense, and which it has an uncertain outcome.
I'm sorry, can you address, if you know, what the difference is between DJUSD and the university? Because that was one of the, I think that was one of the questions, and one of the commenters mentioned that.
Sure, and the city attorney may have more information on that. So SB 98, which was passed, which is for primary, secondary, and colleges, was very specific carve out. I don't know if that's going to be challenged. I have no idea. I'm trying to develop information myself through connections with UC Davis PD to determine what does this look like? How does this work? What would a notification be? What are your concerns around preemption issues? So, I mean, that's relatively new, and so I'm not sure how that's going to hold up or how that operationally looks. I don't know if that is, hey, we had an ICE action on campus, and the ICE action is over, and the agents are gone. I just can't speak to exactly how that will operationally work, because it is a relatively new law.
Thank you for clarifying that, and Gloria for asking.
Okay, and then perhaps I could just follow up with the city attorney. I wanted to check in with you on maybe what could potentially be a third principle that, and I want to just make sure I check with you regarding your understanding that existing state and federal law is a floor, not a ceiling, right? In other words, the city could adopt an ordinance that is more protective than SB 54, for example, which you mentioned. The city could prohibit itself from doing something that state law allows the city to do, as long as the city doesn't do something that state or federal law forbids. Would that be fair?
That's right, we are a general law city. The laws that we adopt through our ordinances, we have broad police powers and we can do a lot, but they cannot conflict with state law. And neither local or state laws are allowed to conflict with federal law, especially in an area like immigration, where the courts have made it very clear, and so has Congress, that immigration is solely a federal matter and the federal government gets to decide how it will be enforced. So as long we can expand on state law for sure, so long as we don't step into interfering with federal law. So that is exactly the metric that Todd and I brought to our review, as well as, of course, bringing our considerations about the practical operations in the field. And of course, as the city attorney, it is my role to advise city council on, generally, I'm going to be recommending that we take steps that will have a lower risk of challenge, because the city has to defend those challenges at its own cost. And so that is a significant expenditure. Where possible, we would prefer to rely on well-settled legal principles that have already survived legal challenge. We also would prefer to rely on state law where possible, where the state would defend against a preemption challenge, rather than getting out into the field, so to speak, and sticking the city's neck out, trying to do something different, unique, or creative. And I realize that that is not the same perspective that others bring to this conversation. That is just my lucky role. So, of course, I do recommend a conservative approach. That will be my recommendation to City Council, but ultimately that is City Council's decision to make. They decide how much risk they are willing to take on.
Okay, very good. And then just one quick follow-up question in terms of clarification then with respect to SB 54, which both you and Chief Henry mentioned. And I just wanted to clarify, that law applies to law enforcement only, right? So with respect to the City of Davis, it governs the actions of the police department, but no other agent, employee, department, agency, etc. of the city. Is that correct?
Correct. And not only that, but much of SB 54 is aimed actually at jails and does not necessarily, just for full clarity, would be more impactful to the county than it is actually to our law enforcement. So SB 54 is very focused on detainer. It does limit local law enforcement, but the ordinance in front of you, our proposed ordinance would expand that non-cooperation language that is in SB 54 to all city staff, which again, since we know we have no obligation to cooperate with federal law enforcement, either at the law enforcement level or at any other level of local government, we felt comfortable recommending that expanded coverage based on the subcommittee's actually recommended language.
Of course. So I don't want to belabor this too much, but I know we want to get to other questions. One thing, there's so much here, and Chief Henry, you referred, and Indu, you did as well, with respect to your suggested revision of the definition of immigration authorities, the Title VIII extension of authorities to other entities. I think that raises a lot of questions. I don't know if we're going to be able to get into all of that nuance tonight. It's a little bit weedy, but I guess I just wanted to check, in the event that we run out of time tonight after this discussion that we have, is it at all possible for us to potentially think about having any sort of follow-up discussions or written questions or anything as this process moves forward?
If I'm hearing you correctly, are you talking about like a public forum or a way to receive input?
I just meant dialogue, I guess, between the commission and the staff.
Yeah, of course. And I'll be honest, we've held many public forums on this topic, and I meet with people pretty frequently, so absolutely, because this is an absolute concern to our community at multiple levels. So I think the more communication we have, the absolute better. So yes, if there's a way to facilitate that, we're happy as a police department to be part of that in any way possible.
Thank you very much. Please, Ellie and others.
Okay, I do not have a law background, so I'm trying to piece a couple different parts together here, especially around this carve out around immigration authorities. One sec, let me go back up to the explanation. Okay, so it says that you clarify that city employees and local law enforcement may cooperate with federal immigration enforcement as permitted by SB 54 when an individual has a prior or current conviction for a specified serious or violent felonies. So I kind of have two questions here. One is, the ordinance as written says that the city is not going to collect immigration information, like immigration status on anyone. So what does this kind of carve out mean in practice? Right, like there shouldn't be any immigration status information to share, right? Even if it is the case of somebody being involved in a serious and violent felony. And then my other question is a bit squishier in that we know that the law is political and that the federal government has kind of really leaned into this idea of all undocumented people in the country as being criminals, as being violent, right? And it's really leaned into these stereotypes. So what is the line here? Is this like a judgment call by local law enforcement if something constitutes a serious and violent felony, or is there like a legal definition here that is being used? Because I think violence can be constructed in different ways.
Sure. I'm sorry, the first section you said you were reading, that's in the draft ordinance. Can you just refer me to that?
Yes,
portion?
so I'm a little confused by we have this carve out of cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, right? In the case of if there is a serious or violent felony. It's the third bullet point at the bottom of page 13 in the packet, where it explains
Oh, are we talking about the staff report?
Yes.
Oh, got it, yes.
Yes, sorry, yes. So that was where you all explained what you changed from the draft.
Sure.
It says there's this carve out of cooperation in cases of violent and serious felonies.
Sure.
And I'm wondering what that actually means if that information shouldn't be collected to begin with.
Yeah, we wouldn't ask for it. We wouldn't, unless somebody disclosed it to us, of their own volition. Obviously, we don't ask immigration status. That's not a relevant question for us. But there is the possibility, and in SB 54, it lists all crimes that fall under this category of serious violent felony. Sexual assaults, burglaries, assaults, shootings, serious bodily injury assaults, felony assault on police officers. There's kind of a litany that fall within that category. But the question for us in that circumstance was, SB 54 was very well drafted in their ability to kind of craft when can this sort of communication occur around certain circumstances. And so our concern is a couple things. One, we enter information into CLEDS, the California Law Enforcement Telecommunications System, which gateways into NCIC, which is the National Crime Information Center, where we are putting information in regarding somebody's arrest and about them. And that information is accessible by other law enforcement agencies. So just by virtue of us complying with law to provide that information, we are in communication with federal agencies. The other component would potentially be is DSI, right? Which is a branch within Homeland Security that investigates fraud cases, narcotics cases, human trafficking cases. And so we don't know what the intent of that investigative authority may be ultimately. Obviously, if they say, hey, we want to talk about this person's immigration status and we want to work on an immigration deportation case, we'd say, yeah, we're not going to be involved with it. But if we have a case where somebody has stabbed somebody multiple times or whatever the case may be and it falls into that criteria and they are working with us on that case for whatever aspect of the case that they are either providing information or other related cases or whatever the case may be, yes, we have to have an ability to be able to communicate with them, to bring justice to the victim of that crime. Obviously, we don't ask about immigration status because to me it's completely irrelevant to our job. But we do have to have this ability and this carve out, because that's why we think SB 54 was drafted so well, to recognize we had a series of homicides here just a few years ago where we relied very heavily on the federal government to support us with resources that we did not have locally. And that was huge in being able to bring that case to conclusion and to bring it to trial. If we cannot communicate in those circumstances, that no longer occurs. And so I 100% agree. any agency calls us and says, hey, we want to deal with immigration, 54 is very clear. We tell them no. That's not going to happen. That's outside of our scope. We have laws on books. The ordinance as drafted went a little bit farther than 54, and my only concern is it really jeopardizes public safety in certain circumstances. Granted, not very often, but we still have to have that ability to communicate with federal agencies. And we're in this bind right now where I don't even know who's a Title VIII agency anymore. I mean, it used to be DHS. Now it's all of DOJ as far as I know, which makes it even more cloudy. And what I don't want is our investigators or dispatchers, when they're working these cases, to either one, be in violation of ordinance, right? Because they're communicating regarding a criminal investigation, or not reach out because they're in fear of being in violation of the ordinance when we have existing state law that clearly defines when can we do this, what are the parameters around it, and regulate that conduct. I don't know if that helps answer that.
It does. I have one very quick follow-up question to that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you laying all that out. The arrest system, the data information that you're putting in there for arrests, that if I'm understanding you correctly is required by law to do that. Are you ever including citizenship or immigration status there?
Nope, never.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for
Yep,
clarifying
absolutely.
all that.
Okay, I am desperate to get to public comment. I just want to say something really quick. It sounds like our subcommittee would love to try to meet with you in the near future. So I just want to say first, thank you so much for starting with our draft and the work that you guys did and taking it seriously and using a lot of the language that we presented. I felt like you took it very seriously. I really appreciate that you bulleted the specific things that were different about it so that even those of us who drafted it could easily see what the differences were. So I just really appreciate the cooperation on this. And I will take my answer off air, but my question is, I hope that both of you and that anybody else who's weighing in on this is not just like looking at our words and thinking, what can we do and what can we not do, but is also thinking, what would I like to see in there? What would help me in doing my job? Because my best guess is you're in a worse position than I am, and many of us are if we have something like Minneapolis happen in Davis. And so I think I just want to ask you later, is there anything that you could think of that would make your job easier or safer that we could put in there? So.
I just want to verify we're holding off on an answer.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, perfect, yes.
Okay. Seeing no other, excuse me, clarifying question, excuse me, from the commission. Let's take Manny's good suggestion and turn now to public comment on either and both the staff draft ordinance and or the proposed principles before the commission. I see someone coming
once
forward,
again.
Professor.
Hi.
Just noticed.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, I have some questions in my comments also. For me, the idea of, to say that we can't preempt the federal law, and sometimes the federal law, there were things that were quite unjust at one point. Slavery was in federal law. And for us to consider that we need to follow federal law, we need to consider that. That's one thing. The other thing that I am very concerned of is to put the city of Davis at risk. Who are we thinking about belonging to the city of Davis? There are some community members that are already at risk. And so who in that are we considering of being at risk, and whose risk are we valuing more over others? That for me is something that I would like when drafting this ordinance to be actually considered. The other thing is that less than 1% of those who have been abducted by ICE have actually had a murder conviction. So this idea that most of us in our community have a criminal, are the worst of the worst, is something that I would like to challenge. And also, I think that Davis, if it doesn't want to keep this symbolic stance, but actually be proactive and consistent, I would like us not to follow this conservative stance, but actually think about taking the risk of doing a good ordinance. And what if it's challenged? You know, you have the money, like, you know, aren't we like a fancy good city? We have money, we have wealthy people here. So I think that is something that I would like you all of us to consider. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, please.
Okay, good evening again. Human Relations Commission. Once again, my name is Spear. I use they, them pronouns, and I've been living in Davis for 7.5 years. As a concerned community member, I am not excited to hear the city taking a conservative approach to a federal government acting extrajudicially and beyond the law. Will we constantly be on our heels if an ICE search hits Northern California? Davis is supposed to be a light. It's supposed to be a forward-thinking place. Why do we not include any furthering of support for immigrants in our town? Why do we not solidify future security for them with bans on hiring immigration authorities? Why not engage in conscious city budgetary usage by disallowing contracts with ICE and DHS collaborators? Why not ban and enforce the illegal transfer of data from public flock cameras to immigration authorities? From a recent public records request to the City of Woodland, the data available from flock cameras used in town was accessed 500,765 times. Again, that's 500,765 times. Each one of those times could be an inquiry from an ICE agent, from a DHS authority, from a CBP agent, to do what we can only imagine as concerned community members, the worst thing imaginable. Detaining them, ruining their life forever. Possibly getting them into a detention camp, getting sick, and perishing. That is an extremely concerning point of data, and not including limitations on these types of principles, as Professor Deeb Sosa mentioned, questions who we are actually protecting. I'm at a minimum disgruntled, and at a maximum enraged that we are not doing more. In conclusion, history books will remember those who promote the moral good of humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Ms. Block, good evening.
My name is Ann Block, as all of you know, and I'll just reiterate that I'm an immigration defense attorney, have been one for over 40 years, and extremely familiar with Title VIII. I'm very curious about why our city attorney thinks that we're trying to preempt federal law in either the ordinance that the HRC proposed. Well, obviously not, she wouldn't say that about the city attorney's draft, because I don't see anywhere in it any attempt to change the immigration law, write about immigration law, anything in that regard. So I don't see that there's any preemption issue whatsoever. With respect to notification, I think I'm really glad, Chief Henry, that you're talking to UC Davis about that. And certainly maybe the language in the HRC's original draft could be amended a bit, but I think notification is really important to the community as a public safety issue. That we know, if you know, or any city staff knows, it should be not just police, but any city staff knows that ICE is present, the community should be notified about it, just as a public safety issue. And many other cities are doing the same thing right now with respect to that. I would also mention with respect to funding, the funding concern about Davis losing funding. I don't know if you're familiar with the city and county of San Francisco versus Trump. Recently, the Northern District federal court judge just issued an order stating that restraining the Trump administration from denying funding to sanctuary cities. This was a case also in 2017. San Francisco and other cities won the same thing. And this particular order covers a lot of different cities that joined in as plaintiffs, which I think would be the case if we were attacked for some of the provisions in our ordinances, which are extremely similar to ordinances that my nonprofit ILRC has assisted other cities and counties in California to enact. With respect to one provision that I thought was particularly troubling that was added in the city attorney's version of the ordinance is under under the definition of immigration authorities. It says the term does not include federal, state, or local law enforcement officers who are investigating or enforcing criminal violations unrelated to civil immigration enforcement, even if such officers are employed by or assigned to agencies within the Department of Justice or other federal departments. And I realize, Chief Henry, you were talking a lot about that, but I think this language legally is superfluous. It's clearly, we're not saying the ordinance that local law enforcement can't investigate or enforce criminal violations unrelated to immigration. However, this language is problematic because this administration ongoing makes claims that they are enforcing criminal violations which have been documented as untrue. Secondly, there are a number of pretextual criminal investigations by the feds which have been turned out to be purely immigration enforcement. And additionally, very importantly, I think we should take the word civil all the way out of this ordinance with respect to enforcement, because simply entering the U.S. without inspection is a misdemeanor. Okay, and that's part of what Kristi Noem has been saying all along. Everybody's a criminal that came in without
status.
status.
I need to ask you to wrap it up. I wanted you to allow you to complete your point, but
Okay.
you've gone really
Okay,
over.
I'm sorry. So it's not just civil immigration enforcement that we should be avoiding as a city. It's any kind of immigration enforcement. And I will note that although I've learned from Chief Henry and UC Davis that flock cameras do not exist in Davis on city property, that we do use Motorola and Genetec, but Genetec does have a partnership with Flock, apparently, I've also learned. And with respect to the mask provision that was struck down because state law enforcement weren't included. That was the only reason it was struck down. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Please, good evening, come forward. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Melissa Cedillo. I work in healthcare advocacy at the state level, and I work really closely with the legislator. And I just want to share a little bit about what I'm seeing there because I do think it relates to what you all are trying to do here. As you all know, maybe, I think last July, HR 1 was passed at the federal level. Historic funding cuts to a lot of social programs and an increased funding to immigration presence. And then in January, the governor here proposed his budget. And I want to make it clear that he went further than he had to in that, in cutting care to immigrant populations. And I bring that up here because I think sometimes this city is over-reliant on living in California and trusting that our state elected leaders will be, quote, progressive and do what's right by immigration communities. And at the legislature right now, I am watching people who call themselves pro-immigrant and fight for immigrant communities, walking that back because it is not popular with our governor at the time, especially right now and especially during the governor's race. And so I want to invite the city to not be over-reliant on living in California and believing that our elected officials at the state level will always do what's right and follow through, and we need to lead here locally in the city. So I would invite you to all keep that in mind, especially as it is an election year, and we are going to watch many people overpromise and underdeliver as it comes to our immigrant communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. City Board, Bruce. Good evening.
Hello. So I believe, just referring to the agenda, we're on 6A, and I'll speak a little bit about 6A, but I'll look ahead also to 6B. And I'll direct my comments to, we've got some city council members here, we've got a lot of city staff here, and I just want to talk for a second about trust. I think a lot of the exchange that's happening tonight boils down you're asking the community to trust you that the city is going to go as far as it can to protect the immigrant community. And that's part of the debate here, is how far is that? At the end of the day, I'm not a lawyer. I would certainly encourage everyone to listen to the lawyers, but we are at some point going to have to trust that the city has gone as far as it can to protect our immigrant neighbors. And to some extent, folks like myself, we're going to have to take your word for it. But getting at that trust aspect, I think it's more difficult to take the city's word for it that it's gone as far as it can on the law enforcement question when it's not going as far as it can on a lot of the other questions, on the social spending questions, on education questions, on labor questions. I know Chief Henry and I have spoken about this, about the number of ways in which the city can extend practical assistance to our immigrant communities. And just to give one very specific example, I'm aware of the fact that the Yolo County Library System's excellent practical ESL, English as a Second Language learning program, sunsets its funding in June. And that's not a city program, right? But it's just difficult, I think, for many of us to trust our local government is doing everything it can be doing in this area when it is falling short in other areas. And so we trust the Human Relations Commission to get the best ordinance it can get. We trust the city attorney and Chief Henry to keep us all safe and to know where those legal lines are. But I think even going above your level to the whole city and to the city leadership, the elected leadership in particular, it's really important to show us that you're going as far as you can on all these fronts. And that will build the trust that I think will help make sure that we're all coming behind an ordinance that's responsible and also responsive. So thinking a little bit about 6B there and some of the things beyond the ordinance that the city can do to show its concern for our immigrant communities. That'll go a long way to establishing trust.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, my name is Reem Aldershmau. I am also an immigration attorney for about 30 years. I just wanted to comment on a couple things. One is the notification issue that was brought up earlier. I think one of the points that were brought up is that we don't want to notify our citizens, even though we have systems in place to do that, because this may cause DHS or ICE to not reach out to us when they are in Davis. However, you also said that ICE is in town and you're probably the last person to know. If ICE is in town, you're probably the last person to know. That actually conflicts. And I think, and because we're talking about best practices, ICE, there are no best practices. We are really in a situation where not only is federal law enforcement through ICE harming the people that they are claiming they need to pick up, even people with legal visas, they're also harming the people who are protesting and people who are coming out to protect, to take on a role of protection of people in that community. So when we're talking about, the safety of citizens of Davis, of residents of Davis, I think we need, notification is, if we want to weigh the risks are that we need notification. The risks, you're already not getting the information to prevent this, when you mentioned blue on blue conflict or potential issues, you're not getting that information anyways, probably most of the time. So I don't see that when this, this should be a priority. It is something that, the baseline that we're calling for, that people are calling for notification. And again, it's good that you're talking to other entities that are able to do this. The other thing that we know that ICE agents are lying, straight out lying to enter buildings and across the country. They're providing false information. So we do not trust that they are providing correct information to even our city. So I don't think that, again, best practices are not happening. And also the issue of risk assessment. So I understand it's the city attorney's job to have risk assessment. But it's also our city council and our city officials' job to decide how much to push. So I today would ask, all of you and whoever's here from the city council to say that this is not a day to be timid. Yes, we do not want to bury our city in debt and in litigation, but, if there is some litigation, okay, we're gonna have to deal with that. We would rather you not take a conservative approach, but actually stand up for our citizens and our most vulnerable citizens that we feel like we all are here to talk about today. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Melodious Jackson again. And we have been talking everything in abstract. We're talking about immigrants. We're talking about all the rules and everything. We're talking about real people. We are talking about families. With me are several members of Un Cafecito. They are members that work in this community, that they help in this community. They bring to this community so much. And they're being treated like criminals. Because ICE is supposedly just picking up criminals, but you're not. We know that. So please put faces, when you think, put faces of the people that you are talking about. All of them today are masked because of fear, because they can be recognized. I'm an immigrant also. Do you think I walk in the street very easy and very calm? I may look white, but I'm not. If I open my mouth, I have an accent. And then I'm suspicious. Maybe not in the city, maybe not in every place. But if you're brown, you're a target from these people. And I ask you to please look at the masked people in this room. They are people that work. They are people that have incredible values, work values. They are amazing families. So I want you to look at the human part of what we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Miller.
Alan Miller. I'm so excited. This is my first 4.5-minute comment. I get 4.5 minutes because I'm as specialer as an attorney is. I'm just a citizen and I'm smart, just like an attorney. You go to a city council meeting and they sit there and they, oh yes, Mr. Developer, yes, oh, I'm not noticing that the clock is still going now. And then you come here and it's like, attorney, yes, I was a Mr. Attorney, you just keep going, you're so special, you don't have to follow the rules. Anyway, I did want to talk about, I really didn't have anything to talk about. People apparently just sit in the audience and just talk into their cell phones doing the entire thing, and so I thought I'd just come up here and see if I could just talk on my cell phone through the entire meeting right here up and, with my 3 minutes. No, but actually I did have a point, and it's about masks. And, masks, I am horrified by law enforcement having masks. It's just so SS, it's so KKK. And the thing is, it's like, I'm also horrified by protesters having masks. Like, if you're a protester or you're law enforcement, you're in the game, you're out there. And you're the people who you are fighting with or opposed to or whatever you're out there in the streets doing, you're in the game and you should have your face showing. Now apparently the ruling is that they do have to have identification numbers. So I think we should start having like protester identification numbers too. No, I just don't think we should have masks. Not like a COVID mask. I'm talking about, wrapped face and sunglasses and those weird things that ICE wears. It's like, just... Anyway, the other thing that I think is totally missing from this is taking into account the future, and that is the AI self-programmed decision-making, deaf, rock'em sock'em robots. And I just wanted to say that I think Davis should require that those also have identifying numbers so that you can identify the killer robot that is programmed to kill you. Actually, they just have these black face plates with rivets.
Thank you for your comment. Good evening, welcome.
Hi, my name is Angie Henricks, and I've been a Davis resident for over 20 years. I want to commend the commission and the subcommittee on their work coming up with the principles document and for the quick work on the draft ordinance. Others have pointed out many ways in which the draft ordinance could be improved. I would like to bring up the issue of time. It would be great if we already had an ordinance in place, January 20th, 2025, but the next best time to get it done is as soon as possible. So I'm hopeful that, an ordinance could be passed at maybe the next city council meeting to get that 30-day clock ticking on when it will go into effect. And I hope we can have kind of a both and, like a strong ordinance as soon as possible and an improved ordinance down the line that we all keep working on. That's all. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you for your comment. Good evening, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to say first thank you to City Attorney and the Chief Police for being here and inform us of what we can do for our community. And I really like how the City Attorney and the Chief Police are taking care of his department. I really like how they're taking care. But my concern is I want to be more aggressive, more proactive, protecting our community. They are without protection. And, the federal are lying. And sometimes there are refugees waiting for a green card. And they go and they are detained and treated very bad. So I really want, and I know that they don't have voice and they don't have a lot of enforcement. I really want them to be more proactive and try to reinforce, to have a little more power, to give a little more protection, to be more secure. I really appreciate if they can be more aggressive and take care of our families that are really devastated. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay. Seeing no one else then for public comment, let's bring it back to the dais. We are, of course, not taking action on the staff document, but we are trying to provide some feedback. We do have potential action that we could take on the proposed principles, but those are the two items that I think are the two related items that we have before us right now. So let me just open it up and see who would like to go first.
I have a question. So we have two documents before us. One is the draft ordinance written by our city attorney, and then we have the principles. And then I'm trying to understand, we essentially cannot really change the language of the ordinance, but if we wanted to be quick about this, which I appreciated, I think, Angie, your letter and your comment about that, it seems like what we need to do, if we want to be quick, is put ahead this ordinance as it is, but with recommendations either for improvements immediately, if the city council is willing, or subsequently. Is that essentially what we need to do? Because we can't really change the ordinance language today, correct?
I think to me, the way I understand it, is that we could just choose what to do with our document. So I think we could just propose that our document goes to the city council. I assume that the city attorney and the police chief would also be sending their document to the city council, and then the city council could just look at both documents.
Okay, so I get it. So I have a question for the subcommittee, wrote the original ordinance. Report,
Can I just chime in really quickly?
Yeah.
I think what I heard earlier from our city attorney was that because they didn't have the benefit of the principles when they wrote up the ordinance, that now that they do have them, when all of this goes forward to city council, they will take into account what they believe is it what they can take from the principles they will put into the ordinance. Did I get that correct?
That's correct. Also, you can provide input on the ordinance, of course. So we would take that into consideration and incorporate your recommendations into our staff report for whatever we bring to city council. So we were here to hear your input about the ordinance as drafted. Can we rewrite it from scratch right here, right now? Probably not, but if you have items you would like to add, let us know and we will make a note of that, and then we will work to incorporate those, and we will certainly report your recommendations back to city council, whether or not we are, as staff, recommending moving them forward. But that is what tonight is for.
So then just in answer to your question, Dima, I think what Lainey was suggesting is that the way to provide that feedback would be in the form of the proposed principles or some version of them. And of course, if we have something else that we would like to offer by way of comment on the staff draft, then we can make that.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. So, I mean, essentially, I don't necessarily think we're gonna go through the ordinance today and try to rewrite it, right? Or I think there's a lot there that we've already feel is very strong. So the ordinance would go forward with these, and I also don't think that editing the principles is necessary. I think the principles seem very strong, at least from my personal perspective. There were a couple things, though, that felt through this conversation that we might need to raise as an additional note along with the principles. And those are the things that we sort of, were brought up, that they were different between the two ordinances. And I am curious, from those that wrote the original ordinance, or the subcommittee that wrote the ordinance, what were you thinking in terms of your thoughts around reporting? Because I see reporting written in two different principles. And I'm still not quite sure I understand why. Well, I think if I understood what your intention is and the essence of what you're trying to get with reporting, then I feel like I'd have a better understanding of whether there are practical issues that we really need to think about, or if they are things that we could get, like the city could probably deal with. But I'm just not sure I quite understand what was the essence of the reporting that you wanted.
Let me speak to that real briefly. Item number 10, or principle number 10, is the reporting provision that had been in the previous draft and which the city attorney and the chief have commented on. So we've had some discussion about that. The word reporting also comes up in principle number 9 that Lainey addressed. And that is a little bit more specific with respect to the police department. And it actually ties into the message you were noting from Assemblymember Aguiar Curry, which is, can we have a collection of information about uses of force and other police-related incidents? And this suggestion is that the Davis Police Department would record that uses of force by federal immigration authorities and the other provisions there. So there, and then number 10 is like when they're contacted and get requests from ICE and DHS and Border Patrol, etc. But number 9 is simply with respect to uses of force out conducted by immigration.
Yeah. So to me, number 9 is the one that feels very much like it would seem that if a violent act happens and ICE is present and creating that violence, which I think is what you're saying here, that it would make sense for the police to report on that. It's a public safety issue. There's been violence against somebody in our community. So that seems like something that would have to be reported on and it shouldn't be impractical.
Yes, it's already required by law. So in California, police officers have a affirmative requirement to intervene if they are seeing excessive force being committed in their presence. And it's in our policy. And we also have a requirement that if they respond to any type of call for service, they have to put on their body camera. And we have also drafted internal policy on how to respond to an incident where ICE may be doing enforcement action in the communities present. Because our primary concern, well, there's a couple. One, we always have a fear that somehow if we show up, even to try and keep the peace and protect our community, that we're going to be seen as somehow connected to ICE, which is a concern, but we can work through that. The other piece is that there has to be direction that if we do see something that appears to be misconduct on the behalf of an ICE agent, that we're recording that and that we are also documenting that. And obviously, if we saw a criminal action by any law enforcement agency anywhere, federal, state, or local, then we're going to take appropriate documentation and forward that to the district attorney as we would any case. But that's already existing in law, so reinstating that in an ordinance wouldn't give it more authority, but obviously if there was a statement, then that could be something that council would obviously be able to consider. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
You did, thank you.
Other questions, comments?
I guess what I hear is that we could put forward our principles, which it seems like we're largely in agreement on. And then I think our principles are our request for things that we would love to see added to the ordinance. And so that means you could look at them and determine whether you could make any adjustments as a result of now having seen them or heard about them. And both documents could go to the city council. I don't think we really have a right to see your revised version, although of course we would love to, but so I think my question is, do you have any questions about the intention behind, did we word these well enough that if you were willing to make changes to the ordinance, if you were able, I should say not willing, if you were able to make changes to the ordinance, do these principles speak clearly enough, or can we clarify anything? Because I think they are our request to you.
Having read the principles, and thank you for providing them, and sorry that we were sort of ships passing in the night, and I was unable to take these into account prior. I would have potentially noted that state law requires some of the actions that are laid out in the principles, as Chief Henry was just elaborating. But with that caveat, the information, the requests are clear. So we do have enough information, I think, to talk amongst ourselves about whether or not revisions to the ordinance we might recommend changes. There were some of these items, I will say, that were simply not in the ordinance that I did review as I was preparing the ordinance. And what I was looking at was the draft ordinance and moving forward the provisions in the draft ordinance that I felt were, very solid in terms of legal arguments. But some of this is new information. So we would, I think, internally as staff, consider whether or not to make any revisions or additions to the ordinance. I also want to reiterate something that you heard earlier, which is that this ordinance does not need to be, nor should it be viewed as the city's sole statement with respect to sanctuary city status, interactions with federal law, immigration enforcement, or protections for our community. And in fact, we were very focused with this ordinance on non-cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, specifically city staff, law enforcement, city property, the ways in which the city can control its own interactions with federal law enforcement officials. So there are a number of these that I might suggest as when we bring this back to City Council, as this is something that we absolutely could explore. I don't really think it belongs in the same section of the code. Perhaps it would go someplace else. For example, non-discrimination against based on immigration status. That is already a legal requirement on the city. If we were to adopt language, I agree with, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who made this point, that it would probably fit better in the civil rights ordinance than in these sections. So what we will do is we will take these principal statements, work through them internally, and what I will definitely do is when we come back to City Council, we will provide a fuller analysis by staff of each of these points and where we think it fits, whether or not we would recommend making changes to this ordinance or perhaps exploring changes to other ordinances. And I did hear from council that they felt a significant amount of urgency around this. And I was a little bit concerned that if we move this to another HRC meeting, which I might be out of town on spring break that week because I think it's spring break, unless you change your date. If we would have to move it forward to your next meeting, we're not going to be able to bring it to council in April, most likely.
So I think the parallel nature of what we've done so far just kind of continues with, we decide if we want to amend these 10 principles at all, or if anything is missing, we put them forward. You do what you can about including them or referencing them to help inform City Council of, you know, whatever you want to add about them. And then hopefully all of it just goes together, sort of messy to City Council, and then you do with it what you will.
Great. I just want to add on really quick, because I kind of appreciate what might potentially be like some frustration that we just like added a bunch of new stuff after already like submitting a draft. And the additions that we have really came out of our last HRC meeting where we heard from so many organizations and from the community. So it wasn't just like, oh, we have time, let's just add a bunch of stuff. It was more that we kind of realized that we had some oversights in our original draft based on what we heard. And then the only other thing I want to bring up, maybe not quite as a question, but a consideration, based on one of the public comment that talked about how we shouldn't be over-reliant on the state to kind of like do what's right. And wondering if even if some of the things that we're putting forward here currently overlap with state law, if it might not be prudent to also include it, right, if we're all in agreement that this is something that we want, if we should also include it in our city ordinance, so even if the state law gets like less, backs away from it. Not saying it would be in opposition, but let's say it's just not as strident anymore, that we would still have these stronger protections on the city level. Just kind of thinking through the fact that administrations change.
Noted, and I didn't mean to give the impression of frustration. Council directed you to draft those principles. I was there at the meeting in which that occurred. They also directed me to get to work on an ordinance, and that's just how it played out. So.
I just wanted to comment, oh, go ahead. Yeah, so I just want to be sure, Ender, that when this comes before council, you will address each of the principles. And because as I read through them, I thought that, as you stated, some of them already happened. And I'm sure, you know, there are many people who are not aware of that. Some of this reporting actually goes to the Police Accountability Commission, and so we hear the report outs on, you know, at the end of the year on use of force and things like that. So, you know, just so that there is a very clear comment on each of the principles so that people are aware which we are already doing. And then some of them are very similar, I think, to some other things that are in the ordinance. And then some of them, I think, maybe there wasn't enough clarity on, and maybe that can be addressed, as you mentioned, in a meeting with the subcommittee and the folks here. So if there is a question about what,
you know, maybe one of these principles that you don't understand or you think is, you know, unreasonable or whatever, if you have that, if you can maybe reach out to the subcommittee and clarify that. I was glad, Ellie, to hear you mention the fact that the principles came from a lot of essentially what we heard. And this was essentially the community saying, these are the things that matter to us. And I do think that we should not delay. I think going forward with the ordinance as it's written or adapted now with our city attorney knowing these principles that you've developed. I do think it's important though that we take into account, do we feel that what we heard today is covered in those principles? Was there anything that we felt isn't strongly enough pointed? I don't think so. I think you all have it in the principles, but we had an opportunity to hear from people who did know the differences between the two, and they brought forward some concerns. So are they covered in those principles? I think they are. I just wanted us to double think about that. And then I just wanted to know, I know that some of the things that I brought up and other people brought up are state law, and so like they would happen anyway. But I think what you're hearing from people is they want to see the strongest ordinance possible, and they want to trust that the city cares. And a lot of them are going to look at the ordinance as what is the thing that does that. So I do think that even if it's a repetitive thing or we're essentially just saying state law, it's worth it for the trust of the people to believe that this local community is willing to stand by those things. So I just want to throw that out as you're thinking about looking at those principles and what you would add into the ordinance.
I do want us to move shortly to vote on those principles if folks are ready to do that. But the flip side of, I think, what Laine was just saying, which was the way that we can convey our suggestions for the staff and council's consideration with respect to the content of the ordinance is in the principles. But I do have a couple points I would like to mention that are in the staff's draft ordinance that are not reflected in the principles, so that we would otherwise, I think, miss if all you had as our feedback was principles. And that is with respect to the definition of immigration authorities that we've spoken to a little bit about. And Chief Henry, if I might, I totally get your point about knowing with the extension of Title VIII authority, knowing who it is among the federal government that might have yesterday been authorized to engage in immigration enforcement activities. I want to clarify that I don't think you need to exempt anything from the definition of immigration authorities, because and I hope you would, and we don't need to answer this, but I think everything in the principles is for the purpose of or with respect to immigration enforcement, which is a defined term. So I don't think you need to carve out from the definition of immigration authorities non-immigration criminal matters. And I think the other concern that I think we probably heard tonight is concern about the truthfulness of claims by some unscrupulous federal immigration authorities who have made claims about, for example, in New York this morning, getting entrance to a restricted area, a housing area, by saying they were looking for a missing person. The reports recently in California of people being investigated for alleged family law violations that are criminal in nature. The accusation or the threat that the president has made to deploy immigration authorities at voting places, ostensibly for the purposes of, prohibiting illegal voting by undocumented people for other immigrants, which is a crime. And yet, there's a concern that the real purpose of that type of activity in a collection of polling places was really to subvert the election. So I think there's concern about whether the reasons given by federal authorities who might claim to have a criminal purpose unrelated to immigration authority doesn't leave folks with a lot of comfort necessarily. And I think that's the concern you're hearing about the exemption of that language from the proposed definition. So I want to just flag that. I also looked at SB 54, the definition of immigration authority there does not have that exemption. And I think maybe hopefully that'll help us resolve that a little bit. There's one other kind of related point in the draft ordinance, and here I should probably refer to it by section, but it is in section paragraph E, which is on the second page of the document, beginning with the word communicate. And there, the staff draft has new language which would create an exemption, this is the third line down, except as permitted by California Government Code sections, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not entirely sure what the reason for that is. I think it's the same concern that we were touching on, perhaps with the definition of immigration authorities, but I'm just concerned that that is the same kind of hole that you could potentially drive a nice truck through.
And I'm sorry, section E?
Yes, paragraph E, communicate with immigration authorities, and then there is proposed.
So by virtue of use of CLEDs, we'd be in violation of the ordinance.
Well, again, keep in mind that it says with respect to, does it not?
Yes, but if ICE or DHS or somebody were to access a system and pull Davis data related to an immigration enforcement, we have communicated that data unbeknownst to us, unknowingly, but still, nonetheless, that is a communication regarding information that would be readily accessible to us. That's why SB 54 crafted it in such a way to carve out CLEDS information. So we're just trying not to create a situation where we get ourselves into a squeeze where we're following law and in the same time violating law. So that's our only concern around it. Obviously, we don't share information with ICE. If they reached out to us, in the last 2 years, I've gotten one single request from us, which we just ignored. But our only concern is creating something that's worded differently than SB 54 and unintentionally places city employees in possible violation of the ordinance. That's really our primary concern around that. Is communication obviously is both ways, and it can be affirmative and it can also be passive through us submitting what is a requirement by the state to put criminal information into a system, which can therefore be looked at by a ICE agent who says, we now have Davis's data, right, related to this arrest, and they use that for immigration enforcement. That's our only concern. We're just trying to stay consistent with state law.
Right. And as it happens, I was involved in the drafting of SB 54, so perhaps we could have some further back and forth on this at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, I don't want to belabor things too much, but which I've already probably done. But those were I think the two issues that I wanted to flag that wouldn't otherwise be covered by principles.
Can I ask a quick question? If we are going forward tonight with moving forward with the ordinance being potentially adapted based on the knowledge of these principles, and also the principles going forward as well in what goes to city council, how quickly is that possible to get in front of the city council? Like, how much time would staff need to take in the ordinance, to take in the principles and what you've heard tonight and come forward to the city council with something.
Look at long range.
I think we were looking at March 17th. And I will say that I think it's more about the city manager getting this onto the long-range calendar and telling me when it will go than it is about how long I need. So if March 17th is the date, we can do that. That's no problem.
Okay, that's great to hear. Do we feel ready to do that, or?
Yeah, I just want to note what is typo, that is fairly minor maybe, but I think is substantive. And that is on our sanctuary ordinance principles document, there are a couple of references in section 1 in the bullet points there to the phrase court decision, where what we I think really mean is court order. So with that one minor typo correction.
So I would like to propose, I would like to move that, given the edit to our mistaken language there, we move this document of principles forward to the city council at the earliest possible convenience.
That is a motion. Is there a second for the motion?
I'll second.
Second by Dima. Any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you very much for great questions, good conversation. Very much appreciate all of the work of the staff, Chief Henry, the city attorney, and the involvement of all the community members here. I think it is the beginning of a very productive and I think could be successful conversation. So, and one that's I know being taken very seriously. Thank you. Okay, we are now then on to item 6B, I believe, and I will ask the other committee on sanctuary issues to.
Motion to extend the meeting.
Oh, yes, thank you. I was thinking to do that. Okay, we are a little bit past time, so we need a motion to extend our meeting time in order to have some further conversation on the next items. Someone's willing to make that motion?
I'll motion.
Okay. Shall we say maybe to 9:30 at the latest? Okay.
I can second that until 9:30, and then we're out.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Okay, I will announce that it has been approved by unanimous consent. Okay. Thank you, Carrie, for the reminder. And I will ask Dima then to take it away.
Okay, I'm going to try to go quickly through a lot of the sort of like setup. Okay, so just wanted to make sure that we are aware of the sort of purpose of what this subcommittee was working on. So we essentially were working on understanding the organizations working directly with impacted communities, understanding the greatest challenges those communities are facing, and then essentially providing an overview of actions and recommendations that we believe will help secure and foster immigrant safety and solidarity in data. So that was the purpose. There were a number of things that helped us come up with what these recommendations were. The first was a survey, which was distributed to key organizations and community members. We also had a forum, which you were all at, the HRC meeting, on the 22nd. We also did a virtual whiteboarding workshop with several organization representatives in early February, and then we had several conversations with immigrant safety and solidarity organizations and community leaders in Davis. Okay, these were many of the folks who took the survey and participated in many of the other things that we did. Several of these organizations came and presented to us during the forum. Okay, What we saw in terms of the survey, I just wanted to show this because it really aligns with what we end up showing in the recommendations, is that there is a lack of critical resources around legal needs, healthcare, housing, language support. Those came up quite a bit, and so you'll see them show up in the recommendations, but that was just purely based on numbers. And then just wanted to note this was some information on the forum, all the folks that came to the forum on January 22nd. Okay, and we are the lived experience subcommittee, so I felt it was important that we also heard some of the voices of the people that came to the forum. I think it's important that we think about this also from a human perspective and not just purely from a numbers and policy perspective. So I'm going to read some of the quotes, and these were from that forum that we had on the 22nd. Several expressed that the idea of going outside made them experience rapid breathing and an upset stomach, even suffering of insomnia. Fear, anxiety, uncertainty, stress, and confinement, not being white and not having light hair terrifies me and prevents me from going to the store. It is a vulnerable moment when you have to go to an unknown landlord to disclose your immigration status simply because you want housing for your family. Students are afraid to go to school. Parents are afraid to leave their homes or go to work and to attend immigration hearings and apply for services for their children. When they come to our ESL classes, they tell us that it's difficult to feel safe when approaching an institution. In addition, some of the comments that we saw in the forum were also about what they'd like to see happen. So while we appreciate that Yolo County law enforcement does not share information with federal immigration authorities, fear within immigrant communities persists. Families are informed about what their rights are, but they know that their rights are being violated. We need funding for lawyers doing immigration work locally. We recommend the city consider allowing non-traditional forms of income as acceptable proof of income for housing applications, incentivizing landlords who work with immigrants, survivors, and increasing funding for the legal services. I just wanted to make sure that we sort of heard some of those voices before we jump into sort of the recommendations. We also did this workshop, which was very, very helpful to sort of hone in on exactly the key areas that people felt the city could actually work in. There were things also that we worked in the workshop to figure out what is the difference between what would fall into an ordinance versus what would fall into other areas of work that the city can do. In summary, from all the things that we kind of went through, all the material that we received, what we're seeing essentially is that there's a gap between symbolic commitment and material action, protection, and accessibility, which came up quite a bit. Immigrant serving organizations, they see Davis as well-intentioned but insufficiently proactive. Sanctuary language and values exists, but immigrants continue to experience fear, instability, and barriers to access. Community organizations are doing the essential under-resourced work, and we saw that through the forum, how much work they are doing to protect people day to day, but they are asking the city to move beyond statements toward consistent material, trust-building action and legal protection, housing stability, system navigation assistance, communication, and visible solidarity. So, if you, in the larger report, this goes into sort of like 3 different levels. Because we don't have time today, we're not going to go through the 3 levels. The first level is like at the very highest level, what are the big themes that we're hearing from our immigrant community and the organizations working with them. Then it goes into very specific actions, and it's kind of a long list of actions that the city can decide to do or not do. We knew that that would be too much to go through today. And we also don't know that the city is going to be able to go through that even in one city council meeting. So what we did is we are giving that as background for the city council to read on their own. And if there are things in there that they believe that the city can do, they should pull them up. And if they're practical and things that can be done, and maybe others are not, they can replace them. So it is kind of a list of all the possible things that came up in our research. But ultimately, what we're giving you so that you don't have to rely on that only is some critical first steps that we feel that the city has the power to work on. It does require, doing some maybe out-of-the-box work. partnering with groups to make this happen, thinking about where money comes from to do that. It will take that work, but that is sort of what we are asking of the city. So those recommendations are essentially, I think we have 6, I think. One is to adopt a binding sanctuary city ordinance, which we talked about quite a bit today, and I think we're pretty solid there. We did want to note that there are relevant organizations that you can partner with. Immigrant Legal Resource Center, Ann Block mentioned them. They have offered to help, so if there's continued need for help, they have offered to help. A second key recommendation was to establish immigration legal defense capacity. This literally came up in almost every single conversation as one of the biggest issues. And it also showed up in that first graph that you saw. Legal support is not enough. One relevant org that the city could partner with is the Fuel Network of Sacramento, understanding how they have managed to have city funding to provide legal support, and also use kind of a network of people to help make that happen. So I think that would be a group that we should lean into, or the city should lean into to be able to do this effectively. The third, and this came up a lot, also came up in the city council meeting where you decided that where the city council decided that an ordinance was necessary. It came up quite a bit actually, that there is a desire that some type of ICE preparedness and rapid response plan be drafted. This came up quite a bit, and we do believe that even it's already being brought up by the city council, it needs to now just happen faster. We need to develop and launch an ICE preparedness and response task force or committee and plan potentially in partnership with other groups that are already doing this work, NorCal Resist, who are looking at preparedness work and could potentially help the city do that work. The task force could be a mix of people, but it would ideally include electeds and leaders from DJOSD, UCD, Yolo County, and partner organizations like NorCal Resist and Allied Neighbors. Okay, and then number 4, that came up quite a lot as well, support your Know Your Rights trainings, and expand tenant and rental rights education with an immigrant focus. So one thing that came up was just standard Know Your Rights trainings are not the only thing that's needed. We also need to be talking about rights regarding tenant rights and regarding, and actually, do I have that? Oh, it was meant to also say labor rights, so that is a mistake there. It's supposed to say tenant and labor rights education. So those were 2 elements that need to be included in trainings. There are many partner organizations that could help with this. UCD Labor and Community Center actually has offered to develop the training and work with the city to have that training available for labor rights. I'm sure that there are partner organizations that can help on the rental rights as well. So those were 2 elements that need to be layered into training. Also, language access came up constantly and as it should. We were able to get these last 2 meetings to be live interpreted and also have materials translated, but it was out of the norm. It was not within the norm to do that, and it shouldn't be within the norm. So that should be something that is figured out how it gets into the funding, but it should be the norm that public meetings, materials, and key communications are translated and interpreted. And there are relevant orgs to work with. And then I do want to note, I didn't add this in there, but I do think it's important as a commission that we do talk about the loss of the Yolo County Library ESL program. That, as Antonio mentioned, will expire, or that funding for that position goes away in the end of June. And so that's an area maybe we want to add to this about. And then lastly, demonstrating visible ongoing city commitment. I think that really helps with what we heard today around the trust. There is a desire to see really bold and out there and visible statements of solidarity, which I think will help with what we had seen through some of the surveys, was that there is a sort of lack of trust or a feeling like, can I trust the city? And that would help a lot. So launching a multilingual communications campaign that affirms support for immigrant communities, There was also a desire to maybe have it become normal, not normal, but standard, that the HRC has forums like we did in the last meeting, maybe biannually or at some regular time, to make sure that we are hearing from our immigrant community. To do that, we would probably need an HRC subcommittee, and so we'd have to establish that, but that shouldn't be a problem. I think, I'm going to my computer here, I think that's it. Yeah, so those were the 6 critical first steps, but I want to just reiterate that there's a lot of other things that we gathered that people feel like the city might be able to work on, and we don't want to limit the city council to only seeing these, and so we're hoping that when this goes forward, the entire report goes forward, and if there are things in there that are actionable and that the city can do, we don't want them to feel like this is limited, but this is a way to also not be so overwhelming that you don't know what is critical right now. Okay, that's it.
I would like to mention that by having, met all the people, the organizations, we only can understand that we have a lot of resources in the city, and many of the organizations are willing to collaborate and to work and to achieve all of these. We just need the commitment, we need the courage to actually do this. And I think we need to be creative in finding these opportunities to help these families. We have families who are being impacted every day. They have people who are, being apprehended, they're losing family members, they're losing their jobs. And I think we don't have a lot of time to really take our time to do this. We need to be creative, and we need to have the courage to really push the envelope a little bit, because it is not normal times, and we need to be more creative in achieving our goals.
Yeah, thank you, Hilda, for adding that. The other thing I forgot to mention, or maybe I didn't mention, but is kind of very important for these critical first steps, is that it's exactly that. There are organizations, and this is not exhaustive. I mentioned that in the beginning slide. This is not exhaustive. These are just ones that really, really stand out as groups that have already raised their hands and said, we can help. We will work with the city. There are the nonprofit organizations and the various groups that came forward for the forum. Almost all of them said they are willing to help. So it is going to take just maybe doing things a little differently and just making it happen.
I'm going to open this up for public comment, but first, by way of clarifying, may I just check in with the committee? Is there action that you're looking for the commission to take tonight to, for example, to adopt these recommendations for the council's consideration?
Essentially, the hope that we had as a subcommittee was that you all would vote to move this forward. And I think it would be perfect if it moved forward with the ordinance. And it's just all the things that the city council can consider implementing. So yeah, just voting to move this forward, but we should have conversation, public comment to see if there's anything that would need to be adapted.
Okay, and then I guess maybe just as a corollary, is there a thought about how the commission might move forward on any of these issues, or are we essentially suggesting that we will have completed our work on the immigrant solidarity and safety assignment that we have, or is there further action that you all are thinking we might take in the future?
Well, Hilda, jump in if you disagree, but my feeling is that this is the culmination of the work of this subcommittee. I do believe that we will need to continue to have subcommittees formed to continue on this work. For example, one of these requests was that we have more regular forums, maybe not, every single meeting, but like maybe twice a year. But that would take a subcommittee to do that work. But I think for the purpose of our subcommittee, that this was sort of the culmination of the work that would go forward. Yeah.
And I think, dissolving a subcommittee is something we could do at another time, right? But I do wonder if, I assume of these 6 recommendations, some of them are appropriate for maybe staff people to do, but some of them might be appropriate for us to partner, to support the city in, right? So it could turn into one of these recommendations, the city council turns around and says, okay, cool, do that then, right? And then we could be able to follow through on being in partnership with some of these organizations ourselves, if that would be useful to the city council, right?
Potentially, and to the city council.
I think it's important that we facilitate. I mean, we may have, maybe we can have a place or a venue where organizations can meet. It doesn't have to be here, but there could be a possibility that we work with organizations to facilitate the work that we need to be done.
I am trying to find it, and I think I have found. And it may be relevant because when the council met on the 3rd of February to discuss the ordinance issue, there was the motion made that I understood to include, not ask any of our council members here to put them on the spot, but I believe that included doing work affirmative and preventive actions that the city can take to protect our residents, as I'm quoting the language of the motion. So I think that is, and we can clarify that if there's ambiguity about whether that's in our purview, but I thought it might be. Okay, thank you for that clarification and for all the work. I want to open it for public comment, but my only thought at this point is this is one of those moments when I'm really proud to be in the city of Davis. And I really want to thank the committee for all the work it's done. And invite the public who have been very much involved in that work, if they would like to offer any public comment on the recommendations. Good evening. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. No, I was going to mostly just say thank you. I think this has obviously been a tremendous amount of work. Deem, I know, has put a lot of time into it. I think these are an excellent set of recommendations to start building, and hope it goes to council, and I hope council will really take a look at it and identify the areas where we can make stuff happen. Mirroring my earlier comment, right? There's been so much agonizing, even tonight about what can the city do? How do we not get in trouble? Where is the legal line? We want to not cross the legal line. I think there's a number of things in there's a number of recommendations in this report that are clearly within the city's purview. And I think this is just such a good opportunity for the city to prove that it cares about its immigrant constituents, our immigrant neighbors, our immigrant residents. And frankly, I feel this is the thing that could really be transformative. The ordinance, I think, is fantastic, but this is the thing that, to me, strikes me as the opportunity for the city to come out stronger for this moment, and hopefully a number of these recommendations and policies are things that will last far longer than this administration or this particular moment. Hopefully, we get a federal immigration reform someday. Hopefully, we get a lot of these national changes that unfortunately are beyond the ability of anyone here to influence, at least as individuals, but I hope that some of this stuff will just build a much stronger civic life, much stronger social life, that makes I'll just speak personally for me, the Spanish-speaking community of Davis feel just that much more part of Davis, that much more part of our civic life, and the ability to access what is ultimately their government as well. So thank you for doing this, and I really hope that the council will take these recommendations as urgent action items and let this shape the agenda for council going forward over the rest of this year and many years after that. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else? Ms. Black, welcome back.
I just wanted to mainly say thank you as well. I think they're great, the recommendations, and looking forward to making them happen and helping them make them happen. So thank you.
Thank you. Spear.
Yeah, hello again, everyone. I'm Spear, just for the capacity of the live stream. In a similar vision, in a similar vein as Ann, even though I have a fiery personality when it comes to my political opinions, I still want to let it be known that I do appreciate what the subcommittee has done and appreciate this kind of effort and the recommendations, especially to get moved forward. I think it's a really good start and foundational place to then start implementing a lot more of the functional things that can improve people's lives that we talked about previously amongst all public comments tonight. So thank you again.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, is there further discussion then on this item? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adopt the recommendations.
I just want to quickly say this is amazing. And once again, Nina, you put together such a clear presentation. Like, it's amazing. It's late. I don't think we want to necessarily take this up now, but thinking ahead, as Lainey started to gesture towards, I think we had talked at the beginning of the year of potentially having our commission move into some of this more like know your rights work. So I'm just a little curious, initial thoughts from the subcommittee, if you feel like based on your research, if that's a direction that the commission could potentially be helpful on, or if you feel like maybe that work belongs somewhere else in the city.
Okay, so this has come up now a couple times, and I'll just want to like put it out there. I do think that we could do this work, but it gets tricky. Like, it just gets tricky. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I just want to talk about it. It gets tricky with, like, what is our job? What is staff's job? We get kind of hand slapped because sometimes we would do a communication which maybe should have included not other people, or other people should have been included. It's just the reality of the Brown Act and all these, like, whose job is whose job comes into play when we get into the actual implementation of these things. So what I've done myself personally has been like, okay, I'm taking off my HRC hat. I'm just gonna do this work as this person in the community because I don't have to worry about those things. And I'm not saying that we should do that. We should, maybe we find out, we carve out some things that we as subcommittees or decide that we will work with the city on as part of our HRC thing. But I worry about saying like everything falls into that just because of the, you know, bureaucratic stuff, which is just a reality. It's just a reality. That's the only reason why I hesitate. Otherwise, I'd say, yeah, let's just take all, like, whatever we could. There's obviously some things in these recommendations that also require, you know, funding and expertise that, you know, I certainly do not have the expertise to do any, you know, legal help for anyone. So that would require, you know, other people. But that's my only hesitation. But I don't want it to bar us. I just want us to be able to figure out what are the things we know that we could do as a partnership as HRC members, and then not limit ourselves. We can do things outside as community members too.
No, I actually think that's really helpful to think about, especially as we like move forward here. So I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that we do keep running into some of these barriers like in the moment, and it's frustrating. So maybe we can try to think ahead and still run into some barriers.
And refer back to the work plan that's already been approved that has things on it that we haven't completed yet. So I think we're in a good position there, at least to look at things that have already been approved by the city council and continue with that.
So that's a really good point. So maybe something we need to do, again, because the other thing that has complicated things is the new commission structure thing where like we have to get approval by the city council to work on things. So like, that's just something that we need to figure out, like, if we can maybe ask in advance, saying, like, these are the things that the HRC could potentially work on, and just kind of get that pre-approved, so that we don't have to go through the, like, having to have a meeting, spend a meeting deciding on, yes, let's go ask for that thing, and then it has to go to the city council to then give us approval. I mean, that's basically what happened in the ordinance, right? We weren't supposed to write the ordinance, or that was what was the interpretation of things. And so I wanted to figure out a way that we can free ourselves to do that work within the HRC and not be bogged down by the commission requirements.
So could we, I mean, have them in front of me, but I wonder if we should just make sure that part of our next packet clearly again states the things that we have already been approved to do. Thank you, Carrie, for helping, and Kevin for helping me remember to do that. And then we can refer to the things that we have already been approved to do, and maybe city council is hearing, you know, that we will love work. Just tell us what we can do to be useful. So when you're looking at everything we're handing you now, let us know if there's anything you want to get back to us. Clearly, we will take direction.
So I'm thinking a couple of things, and I'm not really sure. I hear that, you know, it sounds like this is great work, but it is a lot, and it's very expensive. And you're correct in that, you know, your role is kind of narrow here. And it does have to go to council, and council looks at these. I mean, council can look at these recommendations and go, wow, you know, that's a really neat thing. I think would be very helpful that HRC could go and do. But it is, I worry that it's so big, and I don't know if it makes sense for like the subcommittee that worked on this to go back and kind of pare down and take a look at what do we think as council would, as you said, Lainey, would fit into what we're, you know, already, that's already under our purview. And maybe when this recommendation goes forward to council, you pull out a couple of things that you think would be something that you could do, right? And then again, looking at what your work plan is and all of that. I haven't seen the work plan, and so, but do you know what I'm saying? Is that maybe you bring forward some recommendations, or you give some ideas about what you think would be most useful for HRC to work on. That then, you know, the council could come back and say, yes, that looks like something we could approve.
It's nice to have you back, Gloria. Hi. That was helpful. And I mean, things that I see, Dima, are, well, it says reaffirm sanctuary city status. I think we've done what we can there, check. But update our information card, which Carrie provided us copies with, and we haven't done anything with yet. Create a one-time publication or informational guide that includes Know Your Rights, city and county information, education, engagement, and resources for businesses, so how businesses can engage around this issue, or how they can support community members and patrons, education and training for city staff regarding immigrant rights and protections, and sanctuary city public education, including potential updates to the website. So all those things are stuff we asked for. Does that feel like enough for us to move?
I think just as a reminder, yes, you did put forward your proposed work plan for the year to council, and they approved it. And if I'm remembering correctly, it felt like all of those bullet points that you wanted to do felt like a lot right at once. And so you established these two subcommittees to, you know, kind of tackle these two big items, and then we're going to focus on those bullet points after these were completed. And I apologize that I had to step out of the room, and if I missed something critical in my response is incorrect.
I was just going to suggest, I think I invited this conversation, but I feel like in order to kind of have a fuller discussion, we really need to set aside time in our next meeting. We can't probably do it tonight, given that we've got about 15 minutes to get through the rest of the agenda.
Well, I have a proposal, because I don't want to belabor this, and I do think that this could actually just go forward as it is. I mean, a lot of this I don't think that we as a subcommittee can do. I think some of it we can. I think we can do 4. I think we can help with the trainings. I think we can totally do that. In my conversation with UCD Labor and Community Center, they're basically like, we have the material, so work with us. So cool. We could probably do that as a subcommittee, this existing subcommittee. Let's see here. Demonstrate visible ongoing city commitment. I mean, there's ways that we can do that, but we do need the city to partner with us on that, because a lot of that is about like placement of like materials and things. We could do the work of like what that communications campaign looks like. I think the rest though are really the city needs to take it on. Strengthening language access, that's not something that our subcommittee can take on. Establishing legal defense capacity, that's something that's, very much, we can help guide and make introductions, but at the end of the day, the city needs to decide that they are going to fund this and work with the various organizations that provide immigration law. And then also the implementing an ICE preparedness plan that was already brought up by the city council, and I think the city council needs to want that and move forward with it and make it happen with the task force.
Just to comment, I don't disagree with anything you just observed, except that I have sort of more thoughts about it. For example, the language access, it's actually governed by existing law. Few people seem to know it, but in Government Code Section 11.35, there is a provision requiring that language of access be provided for any recipient of state financial assistance, which includes the city, because the city receives money from the state. So we can talk about like maybe some of the how-tos and what others have done, and something I could potentially add to. There's also the discussion of housing-related stuff. I work with Legal Services in Northern California, which provides information, advice, and representation on housing-related issues. So I think there's more discussion to be had, is what I was thinking.
So much so that we should not move this forward?
No, we should move forward with the proposed recommendations and then have a further discussion about how we might be helpful in dialogue with our.
Perfect. I would like to move that we vote to pass these 6 recommendations.
Well, I think it's the whole report.
Pass the whole report, including the 6 recommendations, forward to the city council.
Because we want them to see the action items, right?
Yes, because this is like, these are the critical first steps that we saw, but there were a lot of other things that might actually be, one of the things that's really hard doing this work is like, we don't know what's possible, right? So there might be some things in there that are very possible.
That are easy.
That they could just pick out and be like, yep, we'll do that one too. Why would we miss out on it? It's just that we needed to sort of hone it into some things as the most critical.
Just have a clarifying question on the motion. When you're saying move the report, are you talking about the subcommittee report that was in the packet? And the reason I'm asking for some clarification is because you've identified these critical first steps, which is very clear and very helpful. But in the recommendations section of the subcommittee report, there are 10 of them. Do you want those to be pared down to just focus on these 6, which are included in the 10? There were just a few extras on the subcommittee report. So I just want to make sure that the motion, we are taking exactly what you want.
I think Dima should make this motion.
I think the report is fine the way it is, and it has, so basically the subcommittee report is what would go forward to the city council.
So there were some additional recommendations that weren't included in this proposal right here that were address housing stability and labor rights as core to immigrant safety, build community navigation coordination and support infrastructure, support tenant protections, housing stability and public housing, and support labor rights and workplace protections. So I just want to make sure that whatever report goes forward, we can take the rest of the substance of the report that you wanted, with all of the specific action items, and change the recommendations to the critical first 6 steps that you identified here, or we can do all 10?
So I'm pretty sure though that at the end, it still has the 6 critical first steps.
Recommendations, but there's 7.
Yeah, no, it's, if you still go down to the very end,
I'm just referring to the subcommittee report that's in the packet.
yeah, if you go down to the very end, so we worked together on like getting those 10 at the top as like just a overview. But at the very end, the priority recommendations, critical first steps are identical to what I just walked us through.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were clear, because if we move this report forward per the motion, it will have all of these first 10 here, and these at the top look like your main recommendations. So I wanted to see if you wanted those altered at all.
Can we change this? Like, could we just?
Sure, I mean, you can
physically
just
move
say,
those
you can say
6?
that you want to move the report forward with the critical first steps as the top recommendations.
Yep, we can move them to the top.
Yeah, that's fine. They're mostly included in there. There were just a few extras that I wanted to.
Is it value? Well, I think the other thing we need to discuss is whether we want the presentation to move forward with it too. The one thing about the presentation that I think adds some value to this is the quotes, because I think we were the lived experience group, and so this actually gives the voice of the people who came and spoke to us.
We can do that as an attachment, of course.
Okay, so then I think that's great. I think we would move the priority recommendations to the top, and then also include the attachment. One thing I just want to make sure of is that typo, the expand tenant and rental, we need to make sure that that also includes labor. This is meant to be labor as one of those.
I think it is.
On the report, it's right.
Okay, so on the report, it is correct. Okay, cool.
No.
Okay, but not in the typed report, sorry.
Yeah, I noted it. That's
Okay, perfect. That, and then also I did notice that like ICE is written ICE and it's all small in the beginning part, and I think we just want to have that all caps. Yeah, and that's it, in the top 10.
I will take that as a motion. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Second by Ellie. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? And that motion also carries unanimously. I want to thank the committee again for really lovely, important work. And much to be done. So in the next few minutes, however, we need to get through the rest of our agenda for the evening. We have completed items 6B and C. We now need to determine our
6A and
March,
B.
I'm sorry, 6A and B.
Kevin, I'm so sorry. We need to very quickly stop and restart the recording because we're at time, so just give me 1 moment. Okay, we're started again. I apologize for interrupting.
Okay, we are on item 6C, determining our March meeting date, which, as others have already noted, conflicts with the spring break calendar for the university and the school system. So I think the suggestion had been made that we would normally be meeting, I don't have my calendar, the fourth Thursday, which is the 26th, I think? Okay. And the thought would be potentially to move it back a week. Is that right?
No, we were going to move it forward because of the deadline for the Tonghai Win nominations
yes.
to the committee. So I looked at some potential options. This room is not available because it is already booked with all other commission and council meetings. Potential options would be at the senior center again, at least last I looked, and hopefully these are all still available, would be April 2nd, 6th, or 9th.
Okay, so we are talking about moving it
Later.
later.
Yes, to allow the Tonghai Win deadline to happen and the subcommittee to review them and make recommendations.
We're talking about the same thing, but using different words. So 2nd, 9th?
2nd, 6th, or 9th.
2nd, 6th, or 9th?
And I think the 2nd and the 9th are both Thursdays, which would at least be your normal day of the week.
Well, while others look at that, I'll just note that I know I have conflicts on 2 of those dates, but I can make it on the 2nd, not that that matters for anybody else.
I can make any of those dates as of right now.
I can make any date.
I think the second is, 6th or 9th, right? Okay, yeah. Those work for me, with the 2nd being the best.
It sounds like we actually have consensus that 2nd.
I can make none of those.
None
of them. I can be late on the 2nd, but the 2nd is the board meeting night, school board meeting night, and the 9th is a winter gathering, a spring gathering with the native program, so. But I'm ex officio and I'll come again.
The problem is that Kate has too many responsibilities.
Too many evening responsibilities.
We are all the beneficiaries. So I feel like there's consensus on that. Do we need a motion?
Sure, and I actually missed the date you said, so
Second,
please make a
sorry.
motion. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, please make a motion.
Oh, did somebody make the motion?
I think
I'll
it- I
make
think
the
it was
motion
made.
that we're gonna meet on April 2nd.
I will ask for a show of hands or support.
I
All those in
second the
favor?
motion,
And I.
That's what the second. Okay. I think that motion has been carried. Thank you very much. Okay, now we are on to committee updates for which we have, well, yes, I'm sorry, we should we take public comment? We've already voted on the meeting date, I'm not sure, particularly useful. And
You should take public comment, and then I guess if you needed to amend your
Okay.
motion for any reason.
okay, is there public comment on item 6C, the March meeting date? Seeing none, I will close this item, move on then to the committee updates, 6D, and ask if anybody, and rather than go through each of them, let me just ask if any of these committees has a report to offer at this time. Nope. I'm seeing none, so I think we can call that item complete.
Oh, Kevin, real quick, I was just going to note for any commissioners who aren't aware, the Cesar Chavez celebration is scheduled for Saturday, April 11th.
Yes, thank you, that's worth noting.
And please call for public comment as well.
And I will ask for public comment on the lack of committee updates. Seeing no public comment,
And do you want a small update from a member of the executive committee of the Hate Free Together?
we would welcome that.
Just to say that next week, the committee will be presenting the strategic plan at the city, UCD, county, 2x2x2, and then that'll be released to the public next week.
Oh, great, looking forward to seeing that. Thank you for your work. Okay, thank you, Kate. We will move then to future agenda items, long-range calendar. Does anyone have anything to suggest for the long-range calendar beyond what we've already discussed tonight? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to try to get us out of here by 9:30.
Well, I have a quick question. Do we need to talk about the fact that we want to have more discussion around what the subcommittee could work on regarding the things that we're sending forward? Like with those 2 items that we discussed? Do we need to put that on long-range calendar, or can we just say, like, we're probably going to put that in the agenda or something like that?
I feel like there's consensus that that is the next item of business. And
I was
we
just
need a
going to
formal
include your
motion to-
work plan in there to take a look at it at the same time, I think, so you can see if any of those things sort of go together.
Perfect.
Great.
Okay, I think we've clarified that. Seeing no further business, I really do want to thank you all again. Really lovely to work with you. Thank you so much. I really am proud to be a Davidson tonight.
Public comment on?
From public comment on future agenda items. Mr. Miller. Thank you for that. And with that, we are adjourned.